of Stэнli Plotkin. We are on the record. The time is 12:37.
Okay. Dr. Plotkin, earlier you testified that there are two Hep B vaccines in the market, one by Glaxo GSK, that's Engerix B, and the other one is by Merck, Recombavax HB, right?
Yes.
Okay. For Recombavax HB, how long was the safety review period in the pre-licensure clinical trial for this vaccine?
I don't know.
Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been labeled Plaintiff's Exhibit 10. Sent it? Okay. This is the product, the manufacturer insert for Recombavax HB, correct?
Yes.
And the clinical trial experience would be found in section 6.1, correct? Correct? Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Okay. In section 6.1, when you look at the clinical trials that were done pre-licensure for Recombavax HB, how long does it say that safety was monitored after each dose?
Let's see. Uh, 5 days.
Is 5 days long enough to detect adverse reactions that occur after 5 days?
No, they
And
would
is
be.
it-
They would be reported separately as observed in the clinic.
In section 6.1 of the manufacturer insert, which under the Code of Federal Regulations they're supposed to describe the clinical trial, does it provide for anything other than 5 days of monitoring after each dose for adverse events?
It does not specifically say that, no.
Okay. Is 5 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 5 days?
No.
Is 5 days long enough to detect a seizure that arises after 5 days? Okay.
It would be unlikely to have a seizure occur after 5 days.
Is 5 days long enough to detect any neurological disorder that arose from the vaccine after 5 days?
No.
Okay. Was there any control group in this trial? Let me rephrase that. There is no control group, correct?
Not, let's see. Well, they mention 3,258 doses were administered to 1,252 healthy adults.
That's right. But does it mention any control group, Dr. Plotkin?
It does not mention any control group, no.
No. If you turn to section 6.2, what is the list of adverse reactions listed in this section?
These are reports of adverse reactions that likely were reported to the VAERS system.
Under immune system disorders, does it say that there were reports of hypersensitive reactions, including anaphylactic, anaphylactoid reactions, bronchospasms, and urticaria having been reported within the first few hours after vaccination?
Yes.
Have there been reports of hypersensitivity syndrome?
Yes, that's what it states.
Reports of arthritis?
It is mentioned.
It also reports autoimmune diseases, including systemic lupus, erythematosus, lupus-like syndrome, vasculitis, and polyarteritis nodosa as well, correct?
Yes, that's what it states.
And also it states that under the nervous system disorders, it states that there have been reports of Guillain-Barré syndrome, correct?
Yes.
As well as multiple sclerosis, exacerbation of multiple sclerosis, myelitis, including transverse myelitis, seizure, febrile seizure, peripheral neuropathy, including Bell's palsy, radiculopathy. Thank you very much. Muscle weakness, hypothesia, and encephalitis, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now,
Now,
it
before
says at the top,
before you go on,
Oh.
these reports are required to be included because they have been reported to the authorities as happening after vaccination. That is not proof that the vaccine caused those reactions, because things happen to people all the time, whether or not they've been vaccinated. And as I said, the company is required to report these. Now, I mention that specifically because multiple sclerosis, for example, is mentioned here. Multiple sclerosis has been studied in relation to hepatitis B vaccine, and there's no relationship, no causal relationship. So the fact that these things are in the package circular does not mean that the vaccine necessarily caused the stated phenomenon.
when you say that multiple sclerosis has been studied and is determined to not have been caused, you're talking about the 2011 IOM report, I assume?
I'm talking about studies mostly done in France, where the situation arose where there was a concern about that.
You're aware of the 2011 IOM report that looked at certain vaccines in relation to whether they can cause certain adverse reactions?
Yes.
Okay, are you aware that one of the conditions they looked at was multiple sclerosis?
Among others, yes.
Among others, and that they specifically looked at it with regards to hepatitis B?
Yes.
And do you know what their finding was?
I don't remember the exact wording, no.
Maybe this will remind you. Inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship. They didn't
Yes,
know, correct?
yes, but you have to understand, first of all, that science continues, and so studies continue. And secondly, that the IOM specifically decided that they would not draw a conclusion if they weren't sure of the conclusion. So what that statement means is that they don't have data that confirm that multiple sclerosis is caused by the hepatitis B vaccine, but that they don't regard that they have enough data to positively exclude it. So you cannot read that as saying that multiple sclerosis is caused by hepatitis B vaccine.
I never said that. The IOM did, for some of the vaccines and adverse reactions, did conclude that it favors rejection of a causal relationship, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
It didn't reach that conclusion for hepatitis B and multiple sclerosis, correct?
It did not reach that conclusion, but other data suggests that conclusion is warranted, that there is no relationship.
Okay. Well, I'll make a remand for that you can produce that after this deposition. Just keep notes of all the documents. So what would need to be done in order to know whether or not any of these reported conditions are caused by the vaccine? What you would need is a properly randomized, as you said earlier, placebo-controlled study, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And also, I would point out that multiple sclerosis is a disorder of adults, and the issue that arose in France was related to vaccination of adults.
Okay.
That does not mean that it would be an issue, even if it were an issue, for children.
Dr. Plotkin, I was just asking you what it says on there. There's lots of conditions listed. I'm not saying that multiple sclerosis is caused by this. I'm just asking you if it's listed on section 6.2. In fact, we can even read the top of section 6.2, which says the following additional adverse reactions have been reported with the use of the marketed vaccine. Because these reactions are reported voluntarily from a population of uncertain size, it is not possible to reliably estimate their frequency or establish a causal relationship to a vaccine exposure, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that's what it says right at the top of 6.2. Okay, but these are events that are reported after vaccination, and as we've just discussed, in order to establish whether it's causal between the vaccine and the condition, you need a randomized, placebo-controlled study. But
Yes.
that was not done for this hepatitis B vaccine before licensure, was it?
No.
Okay. And given that the vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, isn't it true that it would now be considered unethical to conduct such a study today?
It would be, yes, it would be ethically difficult.
Okay. So let's take a look at Engerex B. That's the other hepatitis B vaccine that you're testified you recommend Faith received. Do you know how long adverse reactions were reviewed after each dose of that vaccine in the pre-licensure clinical trial?
Not offhand, no.
I'm going to hand you what has been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 11. This is the manufacturer insert for the Engerex B, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you turn to section 6.1, which is clinical trials experience, can you please tell me how long the safety review period was in the pre-licensure clinical trials after each dose?
All subjects were monitored for 4 days post-administration.
Okay.
That does not necessarily mean that they didn't collect reactions after 4 days.
Are you claiming they collected reactions after 4 days, but didn't disclose it here in violation of the Code of Federal Regulations?
I dare say that they collected putative reactions for a longer period. I feel quite positive about that. When they say they were monitored for 4 days, that means active monitoring as opposed to collecting reports later on.
Uh-huh.
That is not uncommon in clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. Is 4 days long enough to detect an autoimmune issue that arises after 4 days?
No.
Or a neurological disorder that arises after 4 days?
No,
Okay.
that would be reported later.
Uh-huh. And can you provide any proof that there was any reports or follow-up after those 4 days?
Well, it doesn't say that here, but I am willing to bet that they did collect reactions after 4 days. And I imagine that the FDA would not have allowed them not to do that.
But as you sit here today, that's just speculation, correct?
Yes, that's speculation based on experience.
I'm going to make a request for you to provide proof of what you're claiming, that there was actually for both hepatitis B vaccines, any safety review that occurred after 4 days of administration of any dose of these vaccines.
Well,
Again, I'm going to continue the objection, I guess, from last time since we took a longer break. There's a proper procedure to request documents and discovery. He doesn't have to come back and produce it.
The objection's noted. Thank you. Okay. So, and there was no placebo group, correct? In the 13,000, in the trial at the top where it talks about 13,000 doses being administered.
It does not say that there was a control group. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look at the study.
And do you believe, so you think but you're just speculating that there might have been a control group?
There well might have been. It is not unusual for controls to be included, especially if you're looking at reactions. But I don't know specifically for this study.
All right. Well, if you're claiming there might have been a control group, then please do provide support for that, because as far as I understand, the manufacturer, and this was, who makes Engerix-B? Glaxo?
Glaxo.
One of your clients. If there was a control group, they needed to have disclosed that. And I assume they're not disclosing it because there was none.
Well,
Doc, go ahead.
yeah.
Yeah. All right,
Well,
Doctor.
all right, go ahead.
All right.
Miss Newsom, are you still there?
Yeah, my headset died, but I called back in, so I don't think I missed much. We're still going over the insert.
So let's go back to section 6.2 on this manufacturer insert for Engerix-B. It talks about the post-marketing experience for this vaccine. This one lists for immune system disorders that were reported, a whole number of them, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And it also lists a number of nervous system disorders, including encephalitis, encephalopathy, migraine, multiple sclerosis, neuritis, neuropathy, paresthesia. I'll ask the question all the way at the end. Guillain-Barré syndrome, Bell's palsy, optic neuritis, paralysis, paresis, seizures, syncope, and transverse myelitis. Correct? It lists all of those?
Yes.
Okay. But to know whether or not these are actually caused by Engerix-B, again, you would need a properly randomized placebo-controlled study, correct?
Correct.
Okay. But this study wasn't done pre-licensure for this vaccine, right?
I'd have to go back and look at the original studies, but these data undoubtedly refer not only to the study that was done before licensure, but also to phenomena reported after licensure.
That's 6.2, right? Okay, and again, given that this vaccine now appears on the CDC's recommended list, it would be unethical to do a randomized placebo-controlled study of this vaccine, right?
In children, it would be unethical. It could be done in adults.
Oh. Now, if you could please go to page 11 of this same manufacturer insert for the hepatitis B. If you take a look over there, I think you'll find that it provides that there was a follow-up with regard to efficacy, not safety, efficacy, that was beyond the 4 days.
Yes.
Do you see there that there was a 12-month and an 18-month follow-up?
Yes.
Okay. So just to be clear, efficacy of the vaccine was followed up for at least 12 months, for 18 months, but safety was only done for 4 or 5 days.
I do not agree with that statement.
Okay.
I do believe that GSK, like any other company, would have followed their patients much longer than 4 days and would have collected reaction data.
And if they didn't do that, you would agree that that is completely inadequate in terms of assessing safety pre-licensure?
I would say that would be inadequate, yes.
Do you agree with the CDC's recommendation that babies receive a hepatitis B on the first day of life?
Yes.
And these are the Engerix-B and Recombavax HB are the only 2 hepatitis B vaccines approved for 1-day-old babies, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And why is
And you've-
that,
and you've-
you may ask?
And
It is because if the baby
I
is
didn't
not
ask.
vaccinated, well, I'm telling you that if a baby is not vaccinated at 1 day of age, transmission may occur from an infected mother, and hepatitis B occurring in babies is likely to become chronic and to cause serious disease later in life.
Okay.
That's why the dose is given at 1 day of age.
I wasn't asking you any questions about efficacy or
But
why
I'm telling
it's
you
done.
why it's
Well,
given.
well, thank you, but obviously I'm just trying, like any product, obviously you want to have informed consent, understand the risks and the benefits, and I'm just trying to understand what was done pre-licensure for these vaccines, and I think you've explained that to me. One of the things you've said in the past, and I believe, is that without a control group in a clinical trial, you're in la-la land, right? You said that one time, do you recall?
Without a control group, if you're looking for a phenomenon occurring in the vaccine group, you cannot judge that phenomenon without having a control group.
Okay. There's only one standalone polio vaccine currently licensed in the United States, correct?
Well, as far as licensure, I think both oral and inactivated vaccines are licensed, but the only one that is used in the U.S. currently is the inactivated one.
IPV,
Yes.
right. And there's only one Sanofi, there's only one IPOL by Sanofi, correct?
Yes.
Okay. A vaccine, you strike that. How long was the safety review for each dose of IPOL in the preclinical trials for that vaccine?
I do not know offhand, but Counselor, IPV has been used throughout the world for years in millions of people, and safety data have been collected on many such studies, and essentially serious reactions to IPV are extremely rare. So IPV is a very safe vaccine.
I'm asking you in the pre-licensure clinical trial for.
That goes back to Jonas Salk, where where millions of children actually were vaccinated with IPV back in the 50s.
And is there clinical trial data on safety?
Yes,
Okay, and is that the same vaccine that's used today?
yes.
Are you prepared to produce that clinical data? Yeah.
Those data are in this book, and I'll be glad to provide you with the references if you really insist. But IPV, as I've said, has been used in millions and millions of people.
if it's so safe, then how come the safety review period for the pre-licensure clinical trial as provided in the manufacturer insert for iPol only reviewed safety for 48 hours?
Once again, I have no doubt that safety observations were made after 48 hours, but they expected that immediate reactions such as a sore arm or fainting or something like that would have happened within 48 hours. And also, I'm sure that they're talking about their own specific production of IPV and not relying on the millions of other people who have been vaccinated with IPV.
I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Exhibit 12. This is the manufacturer insert for the iPol poliovirus vaccine inactivated. If you could please turn to section 6.1. Dr. Plotkin. Well, this is an older one. If you could turn to the adverse reactions, which is on page 12.
And just
14.
Preserves the objection. To my understanding, Dr. Plotkin had no role in the study design. You're asking him to speculate as to the reasoning of other people that he had no contact with.
Okay. He's testifying that my client should receive this vaccine. I could certainly ask him about the pre-licensure clinical trials that were done to assess its safety. And you put him up as an expert in vaccinology. But your objection is noted and preserved for the record. Thank you, Counselor. Okay, so if you go to page 14, Dr. Plotkin, how long does it say that that adverse reactions were observed after vaccination?
48 hours.
Okay. And did the subject group that received IPV only receive IPV, or did they receive another vaccine along with it?
Concurrently with DTP.
Uh-huh. And what did the control group receive?
I don't see that stated.
If DTP is given along with IPV, how could you know whether a reaction was caused by DTP or IPV?
You could not.
Okay.
However, they do say these systemic reactions were comparable in frequency and severity to that reported for DTP given alone without IPV.
And DTP was the vaccine we talked about earlier that was withdrawn from the market, correct?
Yes.
For safety issues. Okay. The only MMR vaccine available in the United States are made by Merck, correct?
Correct.
Okay. How long was the safety review? Do you know how long the safety review period for each dose of MMR in the pre-licensure clinical trials for this vaccine?
Sorry, say it again, Councilman.
I'm so sorry.
Some of the words are just...
No problem. Do you know how long the safety review period for each dose of MMR in the pre-licensure clinical trial was for this vaccine?
Not offhand. The vaccine has only been used now for about 50 years.
Okay. So it's more recent, right? So. Well. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 13. This is the manufacturer insert for MMR2, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If you go to the precaution section, I'm sorry, the adverse reaction section, I apologize, on page 6. what you'll find is that there was no clinical trial prior to licensure for MMR, correct?
I doubt very much that's the case.
You're not aware that are you aware that it is a grandfathered product?
I am not aware that it's grandfathered. I was alive and well when the product was first licensed, and it was tested extensively before it was licensed. So to say that it hasn't been tested is absolute nonsense.
How come there is no clinical trial data in the manufacturer insert?
That is something that the FDA would have decided isn't necessary.
Are you willing
But
to
we're talking about a vaccine that's been given to millions of children, and I insist on this point, that measles is now a relatively rare disease in the United States because most children receive measles MMR vaccine. That, however, in the since 2000, because of children who have not been vaccinated, there have been 24 cases of measles encephalitis and 3 deaths caused by measles itself.
Dr. Plotkin, we'll get to that piece of this,
yeah.
But right now I'm trying to talk to you about the pre-licensure clinical safety.
And what I'm telling you is that millions of doses have been used of this vaccine.
I understand you want
and
to
that there
jump to the
was
end.
pre-licensure trials,
Okay.
which I am absolutely confident about.
Okay.
And you're talking about stuff that's in a package circular that the FDA has approved in full knowledge that safety and efficacy have been demonstrated.
So you're saying there were clinical trials before the MMR was licensed?
Absolutely.
Is that correct? Okay, and you can provide those?
You can find them in this book if you wish.
So you're saying you won't provide them?
Well, yes, I guess I am saying I won't provide them. If you want to take the trouble to read the book.
Okay, so sitting here today, when did these, can you tell me what year these clinical trials occurred?
Yes, they were done in the 1960s and mainly in the 1960s.
So you're claiming something happened, but you're not willing to provide any proof that it happened?
The proof is in the publications, which you can read.
Can you please turn to the page
like.
where it's in there? I'd like to note for the record that Dr. Plotkin has been reading from his notes as well as looking through a book entitled Plotkin Vaccines, 7th edition.
So on pages, let's see. Between pages 592 and 600, including tables that show the antibody responses, proportion of children with fever and rash after measles vaccine, etc., and the numerous references which go with this chapter.
So are you saying that was a pre-licensure clinical trial?
Yes.
That you just read from?
Yes, but again, I insist that pre-licensure or post-licensure, the fact remains that the vaccine has been studied extensively over a period of 50 years.
I understand you want us to just take your word for it, but I prefer to rely on science, peer-reviewed publications.
That's
and
what you'll
clinical
find
trials.
in there.
And so, I understand that you're getting a little upset about me trying to ask for the data, but I'm just trying to get to the substance. The FDA It requires that clinical trials be on the insert. They're not here. Okay? So you're saying that this table, and let me take a look at it. This would have been post-licensure, not pre-licensure, and it doesn't indicate a placebo group, nor that it was. So this is not a clinical trial as far as I can tell. Can you point me to something that had a placebo group and was pre-licensure, please, sir?
I'm not sure of the placebo group. I would have to go back and look at the individual studies. But in terms of pre-licensure studies, I am absolutely certain that they were done when the rubella vaccine that I developed was incorporated into MMR. Obviously, clinical trials were done before licensure, and I'm absolutely certain about that.
Well, maybe they're not included because they didn't include a placebo group. So
they
were not
may
considered.
not have included placebo group.
So
yes.
maybe they weren't deemed valid and enough to consider a clinical trial.
That's absolutely false, because you can certainly collect reactions in individuals who receive the vaccine, for example, fever and seizures and that sort of thing that happen immediately, and whether there's an effect on blood cells, etc. Those things were definitely done. I'm absolutely certain about that because I was there.
But there was no control group.
I don't remember there being a control group for the studies that I'm recalling.
So you're not aware of any trial that assessed safety in MMR with a control group, correct?
I cannot cite such a study offhand. I'd have to go back and look to see whether control groups were included.
Okay. We talked earlier that to assess safety you need a randomized placebo-controlled study, and my understanding from looking at this insert is that no such study exists. You told me that it's in this chapter, and you assured me it's in there, but you're not citing to anything in there right now. So I'm happy to get a copy from you if you'd like to provide it after this deposition. Would you like to do that?
I will look.
Okay. Going back to page 6, there of the manufacturer insert for MMR, there is an extensive list of adverse reactions that have been reported after licensure of this vaccine by individuals receiving the vaccine, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to read through all the ones because it's page and a half long, but they're extensive. And of course, we won't know whether or not MMR actually causes any of these unless we have a randomized placebo-controlled study, correct?
Correct.
And when I say these, I mean all the adverse reactions listed in the manufacturer insert for MMR on page 6, 7, and 8, right? You understood that's what I meant?
Yes.
Okay. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Look, listen, let me ask you this. Maybe you can help clarify, okay?
That color.
I'm sorry. You know what? I'll leave that alone. You also testified that Faith should be vaccinated for Hib, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know how long the safety review period was for each dose of actib in the pre-licensure clinical trials for this vaccine?
Not offhand, no.
Okay. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 14, Dr. Plotkin. This is the manufacturer insert for actib, correct?
Yes.
Okay. If we go to section 6.1, which is the clinical trials experience, I believe you'll see it addresses a number of clinical trials that were performed, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And what were the safety review periods in these trials?
48 hours for, yes.
Actually, if you turn to page 8, Dr. Plotkin, they did one that actually was 30 days long, correct?
Say again?
I said if you turn to page 8 of the insert, one of the clinical trials they did actually did do a 30-day follow-up, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'm going to read you a sentence from the paragraph at the bottom of that page. It says, in study P3206, within 30 days following any dose 1 through 3 of Daptocel plus IPOL plus actib vaccinees, okay, 50 of 1,455, that's 3.4%, participants experienced a serious adverse event.
Yes.
Right? Now, if one way to establish whether or not those adverse events were related to the vaccine was to have a placebo group, a control group receiving an inert substance, correct?
That's one way.
That's right. But there wasn't a control group here receiving an inert substance, correct?
As far as it says, no.
All right. And the control group here received other vaccines, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And
Well,
so,
actually, there does appear to be, well, that for dose 4 anyway. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Excuse me.
yeah, it's
all right.
yeah, it's all right. None of them do. Anyway, so since there is no placebo group receiving a inert substance, then it's left to the vaccine manufacturer seeking licensure to determine whether or not the 50 adverse events that arose are or not related to the vaccine, correct?
Generally speaking, studies organized by manufacturers or anybody else for that matter of vaccines has a safety board attached to the study, and they evaluate whether they think the reaction was due to the vaccine or not. As it says here, only one of the serious adverse events was attributed to the vaccine, which was a seizure with apnea occurring on the day of vaccination after the first dose, which is, in 7,000 infants, and a vaccine that prevents meningitis and other serious diseases is not too bad.
Right. So let's look at that more carefully. This is out of 1,455, correct?
Yes.
And it was 50 children that had a serious adverse event within 30 days, correct? And this
They had. Let's see, where is that?
That's the bottom of page 8.
Yes, but you have to understand what is meant by a serious adverse event. They try to accumulate all things that happen to children in a trial. And when they say it's serious, they mean it's not something like pain in the arm or something that's relatively trivial. And then they evaluate whether or not the serious adverse event could be related to the vaccine or not. And what this says is that only one of those events was attributed to the vaccine.
That's right. That's exactly what this says. What I'm
Yes.
asking, and you told me that the people that evaluate that is a board set up by the company, the pharmaceutical company seeking approval, correct?
Yes, they
Okay.
set up the board and they choose individuals who are not employees of the company.
But they choose the individuals, correct?
They choose the individuals, yes.
In your experience, Dr. Plotkin, in any given 30-day period, do 3.4% of children in this country experience a serious adverse event?
Yes, that's quite possible.
Okay. In your experience, would you expect 3.4% of children receiving a saline injection to experience a serious adverse event within 30 days of receiving the injection?
That's what that means, yes.
Okay, so 3.4% every month, that would mean within 3 years, every child in this country would experience a serious adverse event, correct?
Yes,
That's
correct.
right.
But
Okay.
you have to understand that serious adverse events mean, for example, that a child develops a respiratory infection during the period of the trial. And then the question is, could that respiratory infection be attributed to the vaccine? And the board decides whether or not it's likely that a vaccine could cause a respiratory infection 2 or 3 weeks after the vaccination, for example.
Wasn't there recently a study out of Hong Kong in which it was actually one of the few randomized placebo-controlled studies in which some children were randomly got flu vaccine and others didn't get the flu shot, and those that got the flu shot and those who didn't had the same rate of flu, but those who got the flu shot were 4 times more likely to get certain other respiratory infections?
Well, I have not read that particular study.
We can get to it later.
But influenza vaccine is a whole story in itself.
Okay. That's fine. If you haven't read it, that's, you know, we can get to it. I have it. We'll come back to it. Now there's another Hib vaccine called Hibirex, right? And then which was licensed after Act Hib, correct?
Yes.
And in that clinical trial, they used Act Hib as the placebo to assess safety, correct?
If you say so.
Okay. All right. The CDC's pediatric schedule you testified earlier also includes vaccination for HPV, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna. Okay. I'm gonna hand you what's been marked as plaintiff's exhibit 15. Sorry, handing it to you. This is the manufacturer insert for Gardasil, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a vaccine against HPV.
Yes.
Gardasil is currently the only HPV vaccine used in the United States. I'm sorry. Gardasil, I'm going to ask you a question unrelated to what I just handed you for a moment while my co-counsel here sends a copy to opposing counsel.
You can keep on typing the Gardasil insert.
Okay, thank you. So Gardasil is currently the only HPV used in the United States, correct?
I'm not sure whether the GSK vaccine is still being used or not, but Gardasil is the one that is used mostly in any case.
Okay. Can you please turn to page 8, table 9 of this insert? Okay. This table reflects girls and women 9 through 29 years of age who reported an incident condition potentially indicative of a systemic autoimmune disorder during the clinical trial, correct?
Yes.
Okay. The subjects receiving Gardasil show a rate of 2.3%. Right, so that means 2.3% of the girls and women in the clinical trial during a 6-month period had an incident that indicated a systemic autoimmune disorder, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And in the AAHS control or saline placebo group, it shows the same rate, correct?
Yes.
Do you know how many individuals were in the saline placebo group versus the AAHS control group?
Well, it says 9,412.
All right, that would be the total number for both groups, correct?
No, for the placebo group.
For the placebo group, correct. But some of them received AAHS and some of them received the saline injection, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Do you know how many received a saline injection over an AAHS injection?
Don't know.
Okay. Let's go to page 4. And table 1 is for girls and table 2 is for boys. I'm assuming all participants were either girls or boys. If we add up the saline placebo group for the girls and the saline placebo group for the boys, do we get 594?
Well, I'd have to do the arithmetic,
Okay.
but
It's
it
3.
appears that there were about 5,000, more than 5,000 in the AAHS control, and about 600 in the saline placebo.
Right. It's about 594. It's about 600. That's right. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if we go back to page 8, the saline placebo group had about 600, and the rest of them were AAH control, correct?
Apparently, yes.
Yeah. All right. What does AAHS stand for?
The aluminum adjuvant.
Okay. And I see it's defined here as amorphous aluminum
Hydroxyphosphate sulfate.
right?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Which we'll refer to as AAHS, or the aluminum adjuvant.
Yes.
Good? Okay. AAHS is not an inert substance, correct?
Well, it's not saline, if that's what you mean. But they use it as a control because they're trying to to determine what the reactions are to the HPV vaccine that contains the aluminum, and separating the reactions to vaccine from reactions to the aluminum.
Make sure I understand that. Are you saying they're trying to determine what the rate of reactions is between the group that gets Gardasil
Yes.
with the group that gets the aluminum?
Yes.
with the group that gets saline.
Yes.
So they want us to compare between those three distinct groups, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And they did do that in table 1 and 2 that we just looked at on page 2.
Yes.
Page 4, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Why is aluminum added to the Gardasil vaccine or any vaccine?
To increase the immunogenicity of the active part of the vaccine.
If I may, what you mean is that if I could use a little more layman terms, are you saying it's intended to stimulate the immune system to create antibodies?
Yes.
Would that be correct?
Yes, not by itself, but by enhancing the response to the vaccine antigens.
The antigens bind to the aluminum,
Yes.
and and the aluminum is persistent
Yes.
and it remains in the body such that it continues to present the antigen such that antibodies can be created to it, correct?
Well, at least during the immediate period of vaccination, yes.
Okay. There is, in fact, a syndrome called autoimmune autoinflammatory syndrome induced by adjuvants, correct?
That is a debatable point. There was a fellow named Yehuda Schoenfeld, an Israeli, who has pushed this idea for many years. I think it's fair to say that he has never had acceptance by the larger community of immunologists or rheumatologists.
I am going to hand you what is being marked. Mm-hmm. I'm going to hand you what's being marked as Exhibit 16.
Yes.
Are you familiar with this book?
Generally speaking, yes. I can't say I've read it all, no.
Okay. And it's entitled Vaccines and Autoimmunity, correct?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And it extensively discusses, it discusses many autoimmune conditions that the authors believe can be caused
Yes.
by vaccines, and in particular by aluminum adjuvant, correct?
Well, I don't know about it.
Aluminum adjuvant.
I don't know about particularly aluminum adjuvants, but that's one of their arguments.
Okay. Can you please turn to the contributors, which starts on little Roman numeral 9. Okay. Keep going. 2 more pages. Okay. There are, I think, somewhere around 77 contributors listed here. You said that Yehuda Schoenfeld was kind of alone, I think, or something like that, with regard to the claim that of autoimmune autoinflammatory syndrome induced by adjuvants.
Yes.
Can you just flip through and look at the universities that are listed here, where these over 70 professors hail from? Are these respected institutions of medicine around the world?
Well, first of all, Counselor, I'd have to go over the CVs of each of the people here. I don't know what their role is at the universities. As I said before, Schoenfeld, first of all, Schoenfeld himself is not anti-vaccination. I know that for a fact. On the other hand, at least one of his co-authors, Tom Tomljanovich, is a well-known anti-vaccination person who's written a lot about how terrible vaccines are. And as far as the articles are concerned, you know, I have to read each one, but for example, vaccination in patients with autoimmune inflammatory rheumatic diseases, in other words, patients who themselves already have autoimmune diseases, that's certainly a legitimate field of study. In other words, how do you vaccinate people who already have autoimmune disease? Could their vaccinations make things worse? But that doesn't necessarily mean that the vaccines themselves cause disease. Now, here we have a chapter called Measles, Mumps, and Rubella Vaccine, a triad to autoimmunity, of which Schoenfeld himself is one of the authors. I am, what shall I say, I do not believe there is any solid evidence that measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines cause autoimmune responses. So, you know, lots of books are published, and a lot of them are absolute bull.
Are you saying that this book is bull?
I haven't read the whole thing, but I am almost certain that there's a lot of bull in it, judging from the editors.
Without reading it, right?
Without reading all of it, yes.
Okay. Are you familiar with the Tel Aviv Sourowski Medical Center?
No.
Okay. You're familiar with the University of Paris?
University of Paris. Paris has many different universities. They're sort of numbered.
Familiar with the University of Pisa? Pisa?
No. Well, I'm sure there is a University of Pisa.
Okay. You familiar with the Technion, Israel Institute of Technology?
Yes.
The Rappaport School of Medicine?
Mm-hmm. I can tell you one thing, because I've talked to Israelis about Schoenfeld, and Schoenfeld's opinions are not majority opinions even in Israel.
But for better or worse, there is a syndrome out there that is called autoinflammatory syndrome induced by adjuvants, and there are apparently professors at universities who disagree about the syndrome, but it is out there, right?
There is, Schoenfeld has postulated this syndrome, yes.
And there's at least 70 professors at universities around the world that are in agreement with that syndrome.
No, absolutely not. Okay. I'll bet if you go through that book and talk to them, you would find that most of them probably do not agree, because all of the articles in this book don't say that vaccines cause autoimmunity. Some of them do.
Okay. There has been concern raised that aluminum adjuvants in vaccines can cause autoimmunity.
There has been concerns raised, yes.
Okay. So if there's been concerns raised that aluminum in vaccines can cause autoimmunity, and there's this medical textbook, which I understand your opinion on, why combine the autoimmunity rate in the aluminum adjuvant control with the autoimmunity rate in the saline placebo? Why not break those out to show them separately?
Well, they did to some extent, but I think the reasoning was that they wanted to be sure that the reactions that were seen, and let me parenthetically say that HPV vaccine is painful, and they wanted to be sure that the reactions that they were seeing were not caused by the adjuvant, or that they were specific to the HPV antigens themselves and not to the adjuvant. So I judge that's why they did that.
Well, under that logic, then they certainly should have broken out the aluminum control from the saline placebo control and showed them in 2 separate columns on page 8, correct?
They probably should have, yes.
So that you could see the difference in autoimmune rate between the individuals receiving the aluminum and the saline placebo, correct?
Yes.
Okay. In your experience, would you expect 2.3% of the girls and women in this country between the ages of 9 and 26 to develop a systemic autoimmune condition in a 6-month period?
Well, that's a hard question for me to answer. I am not a rheumatologist, but when they say autoimmune conditions, I'd have to read exactly
There's a list.
what they mean.
If you go to page 8, they've got a long list right there of the conditions. It starts with arthralgia.
Right. So they have included just about everything that you could consider an autoimmune disorder, and all I can say is that they have, as I just said, they've attempted to include everything, and those are the data. What can I say?
Okay.
As far as 2.3% autoimmune disorders in 6 months. These are women 9 through 26 years of age, so they're not just girls. And I don't think it's impossible that that's the case, especially when you have a list of disorders that is so comprehensive as this.
Okay, so 2.3% in 6 months, 4.6% in a year. In 10 years, half the women in this country would have autoimmunity. Does that, in your experience, would that be accurate?
Well, again, I am not a rheumatologist, so I cannot answer that question specifically. All that I can say is that they attempted to do a comprehensive study of autoimmune phenomena or putative autoimmune phenomena in this study, and that's what they found.
What do you know the percentage of girls in the saline placebo group that developed a systemic autoimmune condition during this clinical trial versus the AAH control?
No,
AAHS?
No, I do not, without going back to the original study.
And Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 17. This is the clinical trial data for the saline placebo control group in the Gardasil trial. So you can go to page 2, Dr. Plotkin. You can see that the number vaccinated in the placebo is 596. All right. Well, you can see at the top on the first page. I'm sorry. On the first page, Dr. Plotkin, it says a study of Gardasil in pre-adolescent adolescents. Correct?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm sorry, say
A study of Gardasil in pre-adolescents and adolescents. Okay. And page 2, you can see it has the 596 saline placebo recipients. Can you please turn to the serious adverse event section, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The 7th page. They don't print with page numbers, unfortunately.
serious adverse events.
Okay, now if you go to the next page, run right after that, just take a look at that. You could see that the second column is the placebo, the results for the placebo group, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you please take a minute and go through each page and tell me if there was any value that wasn't zero in terms of finding a serious adverse event?
No, I don't see any.
Okay. So in the saline placebo group during the trial, there was not a single systemic autoimmune disorder that was reported, but yet there was 218, 2.3% in, or maybe more actually, in the AAH control when you pull out the saline placebo group. Let me
Well,
ask.
again,
Go ahead,
you'd have
please.
to do the arithmetic, but if you subtract the 600 or so from the total, you could easily figure out the percentage in the aluminum group.
All right, so let's do that. Let's do that. So there's 900,412 in the aluminum group. Excuse me, in the total, in both groups combined.
Yeah.
If we pull out the saline placebo group of 594 from the 9,412, would that make the 2.3% number go up or down?
It would go up slightly. That would be, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but that would be reducing the total to about 8,800. And so I guess that would be in here, right?
Go to page 8.
Right.
So the point is that if they would have broken out,
It would be 200 over 8,800. And I doubt if that would show a significant difference between the Gardasil and the AAHS group.
so the Gardasil group would show 2.3. It shows 2.3%.
Yes.
If we took out the saline placebo group from the second column, it would show 2.3 or above, around 2.3 still, correct?
Maybe
A little higher, 2.4, 2.5,
yeah.
2.5. And then if we had a third column that was just the saline placebo, it would show 0%.
Yeah.
Okay. Wouldn't that have been a significant finding to report?
And I don't think you'd have to ask a statistician, but I doubt that the statistical difference would be significant.
Doesn't it at least caution having a larger saline placebo group if your concern is statistics in terms of statistical power, which I
Yeah,
assume?
they might have done that.
But they didn't do
If
that.
yes, I don't know what that decision was based on, but if you're talking about implication of aluminum, there at this point there's really no reason to suspect that aluminum by itself can cause autoimmune disease.
Here is the pre-licensure clinical study in which 2.3% of participants in the Gardasil group and in the control group had a systemic autoimmune disorder, and it was deemed safe because they were around the same rate, right?
Yes.
But the saline placebo group that didn't get the aluminum adjuvant had a 0%, right?
A small group, yes.
Of 594.
Yeah.
And so the vaccine apparently, if you turn back, Dr. Plotkin, to page 4, please, of the Gardasil insert. You there?
Yep.
Do you see that they break out Gardasil in one column, those who received AAHS control in another, and those that had saline placebo in a third column?
Right.
And that's with only 320 participants in the saline group in Table 1, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and in Table 2 they break it out as well, correct? The saline group from the AAHS control group?
Yes.
If you turn to page 5, they again break out the Gardasil, AAH control, and saline placebo groups in tables 3 and 4, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But they chose to conveniently combine it when it came to systemic autoimmune disorders, right?
Well, in the case of the page 4 and 5, they were looking at local reactions, and of course aluminum does give local reactions. On page 8, where they were looking at systemic autoimmunity, I guess they believed that aluminum in itself is a reasonable control and would not cause autoimmunity.
Okay, so going into this study, they just assumed aluminum wouldn't cause autoimmunity, and so that's how they proceed in designing it. I got it. All right. Let's... All right. Dr. Plotkin, I'm going to hand you what's... yes, I'm going to hand you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 18. This is a, oh, did you send it? Okay. Okay. This is the manufacturer insert for a drug called Enbrel, correct?
Mm-hmm.
What is Enbrel a drug for?
Well, it's essentially an immunosuppressive, and it's I think it's used a lot for in autoimmune diseases and cancers.
This is a drug given to sick people, not healthy people, correct?
Right.
Unlike vaccines, which are typically given to healthy children and babies, right?
Right.
Okay. If you turn to page 10, Dr. Plotkin, go all the way to the bottom, the 6.1, section 6.1, clinical studies experience.
Mm-hmm.
The very first line under 6.1 says, the data described below reflect exposure to Enbrel in 2,219 adult patients with RA followed for up to 80 months.
Mm-hmm.
So in studying this drug given to 6 people, they reviewed safety for up to 6.5 years,
Mm-hmm.
correct? And they also used...
There's no answer to the question.
Oh.
It's going, as you're speaking.
Oh, sorry, say,
When you say correct, there's no
you're right.
answer.
I apologize. Okay.
Just-
Was that a yes, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
Do we miss any others? No.
It's gradually happening more and more.
Okay, I'm sorry. Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. And the placebo group here was, in this study, was a saline placebo for all controls, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So what is your point?
think the point speaks for itself, Dr. Plotkin.
Well, it doesn't, because Enbrel is given over long periods of time, and one has to, since it's immunosuppressive, one has to look for things that may happen because of immunosuppression. Vaccines are given at particular times and are generally not continuously given over long periods of time. But because aside from that, you're basing this on the package circulars, not on the combined experience with the vaccines that in many cases has taken place over 50 or 60 years.
I'm basing this, Dr. Plotkin, I'm not basing anything on anything. I'm just asking you questions, and my questions are geared towards being able for my client to be able to pick up what is supposed to be a document that includes the clinical trial experience of the particular biologic or drug and understand what the adverse events rate was for that product. And that's all I'm trying to ask you questions about, to understand. That's it. And in terms of what you've just said about Enbrel, let's just we'll just talk about one quick vaccine, and we've really got to move on because it's got a little more material to cover. DTaP vaccines given at 2 months of age, correct?
Yes.
And at 4 months of age?
Yes.
And at 6 months of age?
Yes.
18 months?
Yes.
At 3 to 4 years of age?
Yes.
Then again at 11 years of age?
Yes.
In the slightly Tdap version?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so here you have just one vaccine, put aside the other one, that is given over an extended period of time, but yet as we saw, as the manufacturer interest will show, there is no clinical trial that I'm aware of, and I'm happy for you to show me or produce one that actually does what the study in Enbrel does, which is has a saline placebo-controlled group and reviews safety over anything more than typically a few days or 30-day period.
I dispute that. I think is almost certain, or certain in my mind, that they observed the patients over a longer period of time, but that they looked specifically for acute reactions during the first few days after immunization. And also, I add to that, and I insist on repeating, that one has to look at the total experience with a drug or a vaccine over a period of time, not simply what is in the FDA package circular.
So are you saying that instead of relying on clinical data, saline, inert placebo-controlled studies, we should just rely on the experience? Well, isn't it true that there's a lot of people out there? In fact, you've said used a lot of adjectives for them today so far, who are out there and say that their experience is that vaccines have caused all kinds of serious adverse reactions. Isn't that precisely what is on section 6.2 of each of those inserts? If your approach is used, why are they not given equal weight? I mean, if that's the way we're going to do science. I'm asking for the clinical data.
Science depends on a body of work. It does not depend on any single studies. It depends on repetition, on data that confirm other data. And so you cannot take any single study and rely on that and say that is the truth. The truth comes out of repetition and experience.
So is your point just to trust you versus actually have the actual data to support?
No, it's the accumulation of data.
And you can provide the data to support everything you're saying here today, correct?
Everything that I'm saying is in this book.
You wrote that book?
Sorry?
You're the editor of that book, correct?
Yes.
It's called Plotkin's Vaccines?
Yes.
Dr. Plotkin, what is thrombocytopenia?
Decreased platelets.
Okay. Can it be caused by an autoimmune reaction? Isn't that what it's known to be caused by, the body attacking its own platelets?
That's one of the reasons, yes.
Okay. Can the MMR vaccine cause thrombocytopenia?
Yes.
Okay. What is brachial neuritis?
Brachial neuritis is basically a reaction to a local injection where you have pain in the arm.
I'm going to read you a definition of brachial neuritis from Johns Hopkins Medicine, and you can tell me if you agree or disagree with it. Quote, brachial neuritis is a form of peripheral neuropathy that affects the chest, shoulder, arm, and hand. Peripheral neuropathy is a disease characterized by pain or loss of function in the nerves that carry signals to and from the brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system, to other parts of the body, end quote.
Yes.
Okay. Can DTaP or Tdap cause brachial neuritis?
If it's administered in the incorrect way, yes.
Okay. Can the MMR cause febrile seizures?
Yes.
Can the flu shot cause Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Uncertain, but possible.
Can the DTaP or Tdap cause Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Not that I'm aware of.
Hepatitis B cause Guillain-Barré syndrome?
Again, I don't think the evidence supports that. Guillain-Barré syndrome is a not uncommon event, particularly in adults.
After vaccination, is that what you mean?
No, I mean in general.
In general, okay. Can the hepatitis B vaccine cause encephalitis?
No, I would say definitely not.
Okay. Can the MMR vaccine cause acute or chronic arthritis?
It can cause, in adults, it can cause acute arthralgia, I would say, pains in the joints, but that does not seem to be a permanent phenomenon. And it's unusual in children.
So yes for the acute in adults, but otherwise uncertain?
In children, it must be quite rare if it occurs at all. But it does occur in adult women.
Can the flu shot, DTaP, or Hep B cause transverse myelitis?
I would say that's unlikely. You said influenza, what would you say, hepatitis B?
Or DTaP.
Or DTaP. I think that's the most unlikely.
More likely that it would be the flu shot or Hep B?
Well, it's difficult with influenza because it's such a widely used vaccine, but I don't see any medical reason why any one of those vaccines should cause transverse myelitis.
But it has been reported.
It has been reported. Influenza, okay. I suppose, maybe, but I'm not aware of any proof.
Are you aware that, okay. Can hepatitis B or the flu shot cause fibromyalgia?
Fibromyalgia, that's such a vague syndrome. It's, again, difficult to know, but influenza is, there are some differences between influenza vaccine and other vaccines, but with hepatitis B, I don't see any reason why it should cause fibromyalgia.
So no on the Hep B and maybe on the flu?
Yeah, I guess boils down to that.
Can the DTaP or Tdap cause acute disseminated encephalomyelitis?
I would say no.
Can the hepatitis A vaccine cause autoimmune hepatitis?
Oh dear, no.
Can hepatitis B cause lupus?
I see no reason why it could.
That's a no?
No.
Can influenza cause lupus? Influenza vaccine.
I can see no mechanistic reason why it would, and so I would say no.
Okay. Can the hepatitis B vaccine cause rheumatoid arthritis?
There have been studies along those lines, and I would say that they're unconvincing as far as the vaccine causing rheumatoid arthritis. The difficulty is that rheumatoid arthritis is a common disease, and it of course occurs frequently in adults, so it's very difficult to know whether some precipitating event could have caused it. But at this point, I would say no.
Vaccines are also commonly given to most people in the country, correct?
They're often given, yes.
So determining causality really requires a double-blind placebo-controlled study, correct?
It does if you want to be certain, or at least a statistically strong relationship.
What do you mean by statistically strong relationship?
I mean a situation where you have a comparative group and you can say that compared to the comparative group that the association you're looking at is statistically different than the control group.
And from that, you believe you can determine causation?
Well, you can determine association. Then you have to look and see whether there is some kind of biological explanation.
Well, isn't it difficult to determine association? Isn't it difficult to determine association when it comes to vaccines and a alleged injury, because everybody's, for the most part, gets vaccinated?
That is true. That is precisely why there are so many false associations between vaccines and disease.
Isn't it also the reason then that careful preclinical studies using an inert placebo should be conducted before licensure?
It would be ideal to do so, but one would also have to would have to be very large studies and covering different age groups.
Right.
And by and large, those data come out much later after experience with a vaccine used in thousands or millions of people.
Well, that of course presumes that the adverse events are long-term adverse events are rare, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know whether faith is susceptible to any? I'm going to try strike that. There's a lot of conditions, so I'm going to try this a little bit of a different way so we can get through this a bit quicker. Is faith susceptible to suffer any of the conditions we have reviewed thus far?
You mean the infectious diseases or the non-infectious diseases?
I'm talking about the adverse event. I'm talking about the conditions that we just reviewed. starting with thrombocytopenia and ending with
Well,
rheumatoid arthritis?
I know nothing about the child, and therefore am unable to answer.
Do you know whether Faith has a genetic variant that renders her predisposed to suffer any of these conditions from vaccination?
I do not.
Do you know whether Faith has a genetic variant in her microbiome DNA that renders her predisposed to suffer any of the conditions we reviewed?
I am not aware of that.
Do you know whether Faith has any environmental exposure that would render her predisposed to suffer any of the conditions that we've just reviewed?
No.
Okay. In 1991, the IOM issued a report regarding vaccine safety. Are you familiar? Correct?
Yes.
Are you familiar with that report?
Yes.
That report looked at 22 serious injuries associated with DTaP vaccines and rubella vaccines, correct?
Mhm.
Did you provide information to the... Was that a yes?
Yes.
Did you provide information to the IOM committee conducting this review?
I believe I sent them papers. I was not involved with the committee in any direct way.
Are you aware of whether they thanked you in the introduction?
They may have. I mean, I obviously was a source of information about rubella vaccine, for example.
The IOM searched for evidence regarding whether DPT can cause autism, correct?
Yes.
And they could not find any evidence that would help them to make any determination one way or another with regard to whether DPT causes autism, correct?
Well, if you mean that they use their statement of not having enough information to make a decision, probably yes.
Do you recall that they had 5 categories of conclusions, Dr. Plotkin, in that
Yeah,
report?
something like that. Yeah.
Okay. The first category, strike that. Do you recall that the first category was no evidence bearing on a causal relation?
I don't recall specifically, but I believe you're correct.
Okay, well I'll give you a copy. Let's get you a copy. Going to hand you, Dr. Plotkin, what's being marked as Exhibit 19. Yeah, you send it?
Uploading.
Okay. Dr. Plotkin, the title of this is The Adverse Effects of Pertussis and Rubella Vaccines, correct?
Yes.
This was by the Institute of Medicine in 1991.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if we go to all the way, if you go to the second to last page, Dr. Plotkin, I suspect that's what you're looking for. All right. This is a table of the summary of conclusions by adverse event for DPT and MMR, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So there are 5 conclusion categories, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The first one is no evidence bearing on a causal relation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And what that means, if you see was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay. if you go to footnote C, which defines what no evidence bearing on a causal relation means, isn't it true that it says, no category of evidence was found bearing on a judgment about causation. All categories of evidence left blank in table 1.1-1, correct?
Yes.
Okay. There's only one condition for which they couldn't find any evidence one way or another on whether whether the vaccine causes that condition, correct?
Right.
And that was, what was that condition?
Autism.
Okay. Now, the IOM reviewed whether DPT can cause 17 other serious conditions. And on this chart, it found that evidence supported a causation for 4 of them. For DPT, rejected causation for 4 of them, but that the evidence was insufficient to determine causation for 9 of them. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. As for the MMR vaccine, the IOM reviewed 4 conditions, right?
Mm-hmm.
For the first 2, was that a yes, Dr. Plotkin?
Yes.
I hate to trouble you, but if you could say yes instead of it would speed things along a bit. Appreciate it. If for 2 of them, it found that the evidence was insufficient to make a causation determination, correct?
Yes.
Okay. But for chronic arthritis, it found that the evidence is consistent with a causal relationship.
Yes.
That would be there's evidence consistent with a causal relationship between the MMR vaccine and chronic arthritis, correct?
Yes.
And it also found that the evidence indicates a causal relationship between the MMR vaccine and acute arthritis, correct?
Yes.
Do you dispute these findings?
Well, first of all, the IOM's later report was not as definitive as far as chronic arthritis is concerned. And the evidence for the consistency, first of all, it must be stressed, we're talking about adult women receiving the vaccine, not children. And the other point is that the data really came from one center in British Columbia and was not generally seen. As far as acute arthritis is concerned, it really should be arthralgia, not arthritis, because there's a difference between those 2 things. But anyway, there's no doubt that the vaccine does cause pains in the joints, but again, particularly in adult women, it is not a big problem in children.
On the next page, Dr. Plotkin, where it says of the report, it's under research needs. Does the first sentence say, in the course of its review, the committee encountered many gaps and limitations in knowledge bearing directly and indirectly on the safety of vaccines?
Yep.
Okay, and then the last sentence of that paragraph says, clearly if research capacity and accomplishment in these areas are not improved, future reviews of vaccine safety will be similarly handicapped, correct?
Right, correct.
Okay.
So I think it's worth pointing out that the vaccine community did respond to those conclusions, and that in particular CDC set up a situation with centers like Kaiser Permanente in California, where they do very elaborate safety studies because they have a large populations receiving vaccines or not receiving vaccines, and they can do comparative studies. And in addition, WHO has set up safety reviews on vaccines. And of course, CDC has a safety department. and there are funded sort of safety centers throughout the country.
Okay.
So it's not as if the vaccine community has ignored the issue of vaccine safety.
Well, wonderful. We'll go through all of that, I can assure you. But I got to take it piece by piece, okay? So one step at a time, and we will get to Kaiser and the various things that you just talked about, and we'll address all of them. I just want, hopefully we get to everything. All right. You know what? Why don't we take just a 2-minute quick break?
I'm going to end this.
Perfect.
This ends just number 3 of the deposition of Dr. Stэнli Plotkin. We are going off the record. The time is 14:23.